Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have John Davis. John, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
It is my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. When I was young, I had dreams of being a stuntman and a fight director, and I went ahead and did all that. And then I became an artistic director, a college professor, and now I'm a professional keynote speaker, and I go around to corporations all over the world, and I awaken the interaction here of their team using whips and nunchucks and comedy.
Those are some pretty cool professions, and you've got the speaking gig down to it's very unique, isn't it? Any thoughts on approach to that at all?
Absolutely. When I first started speaking, I really tried to mold myself into the box of being a leadership speaker or something like that. And I struggled for years trying to be a leadership speaker. And when I leaned back into my authentic self and started doing the things that I really enjoyed doing and loved doing, then I started getting all kinds of work. It was like, the corporations didn't want the standard leadership speaker. They wanted the guy who comes in there and makes them laugh and gives them whips and nunchucks, but also brings really valuable content.
It reminds me of, have you ever heard any Earl Nightingale at all?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he talks about follow the follower. Everyone sort of, is copying everyone else. And in your instance, you decided to go completely against that, and it's working pretty well for you.
Well, it's so funny because it literally is. It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger used to say, when somebody told him he couldn't do something, he'd say, "Great, I'm going to be the first." And you look at his career, and he has, he became top in bodybuilding, he became top in the movie industry, he became top in the political world. He did everything he ever wanted to do just by being able to step outside of himself and be something different. And for me, that's actually my biggest marketing for speaking. My catch line is when I talk to a client for the first time, it says, "What kind of comedy sword fighting stuntman do for you?" And it catches their attention right away. They're like, "What?" And then what's interesting is then I bring real value, because I also bring neurolinguistics and brain science and all the techniques for breaking through their fears and their anxieties, and through change and leading a team through change. So I'm not only bringing them really something fun and exciting, but I'm also bringing something that really changes the work environment and the work culture.
Well, I watched I feel like I'm doing the audience a bit of a disservice, because I already know I watched the video on the website, but of course other people haven't. So can you share? I don't know. Maybe I might have to try and put a bit into the video or something. But can you share what that looks like?
Well, I come out on stage and I first start with a joke, but then I work my way through. The first thing I do is I bring someone on stage to demonstrate fearlessness, and I crack targets out of their hand with a whip. And then by the end of the whole presentation, they've been laughing, they've been joking, they've been interactive. I use no PowerPoints in any presentations because I want an in-the-room experience, not something that separates them. And technically, and this is for anybody who's out there who's in business who gives presentations, when you turn on a PowerPoint presentation, it splits the brain into two very distinct segments, which puts the brain into a form of trance, and it actually shuts down the part of the brain for content retention. So you really don't want to use as much PowerPoint. You want to use PowerPoint as an enhancement, not a thing to lean on top of. I don't use PowerPoint at all, just because of the fact that I don't want to have that sort of thing. But the last thing I do on that stage in my main speech is I bring the most timid person I can find up from the audience, and in under 5 minutes time, using my 5F techniques, I take them from never having cracked a whip to taking targets out of my hand.
That is quite a promise, isn't it?
And it happens every time. And it's interesting because it is all about managing their fear and getting them to leverage their present moment effectively. And once I get their fear managed, I also adjust their timeline from learning the skill to knowledge of the skill. So I shorten their learning curve, I increase their productivity, and I get them to their goal faster.
So has that ever kind of gone badly for you in any way?
You know what? The only time it came close was the only time it came close was the last time I chose a man to do that. Because you put a whip in a guy's hand and the testosterone kicks in and it gets a little crazy on stage. He almost hit me in the ear as opposed to near my hand, which was 3 feet away from my ear. Right. But I find that when I choose a woman for that routine, they're very focused. They're very clear and the testosterone obviously does not get in the way.
Well, how do you learn? How does that come about, learning that skill?
The whip cracking or getting someone to do that.
How did it come about for you, the whip cracking?
It's funny. I'm a firm believer that when you put yourself out there boldly, and you, like, for instance, I wrote a whole show about that needed me to crack whips in the show, and I had never cracked a whip. So I gave myself a thing that I needed to get done by a certain date because I had booked the show. And so it gave me that impetus to jump right into learning it. And it was very interesting because the first guy who tried to show me how to crack a whip, for a week, he tried to teach me how to crack a whip and it just wasn't working. And then somebody walked up to me and said, have you ever been fishing? And I said, yeah. I said, just cast your fishing rod. And I cast the fishing rod and it cracked. And I was like, that's so weird. And then I realized that when the first guy was trying to teach me, the first thing he said to me was, let me explain the speed of sound. So basically, because that's why whip cracks. Whip cracks because it's actually breaking the sound barrier, and the sound you hear is a small sonic boom. And so for a week, I was listening to what he knew about whip cracking, but not actually learning anything from an experiential level. And this other guy walks up and says, he met me where I was, knew that I didn't know how to crack a whip, and basically said, it's just like casting a fishing rod. I said, "Oh, that's easy, crack." And that's what I do when I'm on stage with the person I draw up from the audience. Is I never talk about whips. I only talk about fishing, and I get them talking about fishing. I get part of the audience to do funny fish faces like this, right? And then I get them to choose which fish they want to catch and the whole bit. So I got them laughing and joking and feeling light in the moment. And I just get them to cast their fishing rod, and they cast it and they crack the whip. For me, that's how I learned. And then once I learned the first crack, once you break through the educational barrier of getting something the first time, you've now, what they say, cracked the nut. You've gone past the hard shell, and now you're into the meat of the thing. Everything after the first crack is easy, because then it's all experimentation and improvisation. You just play around until you figure things out. Now I do fancy, crazy whip cracking all around my body now, but it was all because I realized that after that first crack that I could. And once I figured out that I could, then all I had to do was just play around and find out where the next crack was going to come from.
Have you caught yourself at all at any point?
Oh, buddy. I'm going to take my glasses off. I don't know if you can see this. There's a lump right here. And that lump is where I broke my nose with the handle of the bullwhip because it got caught under my shoe. And the handle, because you have all that motion coming up, that handle had to go somewhere, and it went right into my face. And so I broke that. I've cut myself several times, bleeding. I've hurt myself pretty good with them.
Got some war wounds.
It's all part of the process. It's all part of the process.
Well, you mentioned NLP. Presumably you use some of those, because NLP's, correct me if I'm wrong, quite good at shortcutting that learning curve. So it's good for learning things. So
yeah,
is that how you use to learn it, and also how you teach others?
Well, I'll give you an example of how I use it. And when I first learned it, I was working with people who were hypnotists, and so they were already, I was working a lot of Renaissance festivals and a lot of outdoor theater things, and so I was working around variety artists and hypnotists and magicians and fire eaters and sword swallowers. I was around some of the craziest people in the world, but they were all doing NLP, and I started getting very interested in NLP. But the way I use it in my program, that to go back to that person that I bring on stage with the whip, after they crack it the first time, casting their fishing rod, the first thing I say to them is I say, "Did you hear it crack?" And they go, yes. So what I've just done is I've anchored them to a sound, right? So now that sound means they know how to do it. So did you hear it crack? Yes. So then I do a thing that's called a hypnotic wipe, where I literally go, I take my hand and I sweep from high to low. And this is a gesture that all of us do naturally, but in hypnosis, they call this a wipe. It's like you're supposed to forget that when you do that, you know. And I'll give you an example. The people who do this naturally, you know, somebody says, "Gosh, you look beautiful today." You go, "Stop." All right. Yeah, that's stop. Right. But the thing is, if you can anchor something first, if you can go, "Did you hear it crack?" And then you anchor it, and then you go, wipe away anything else and go, "So you already know how to make it crack." And you start nodding, and you almost monotone the already know how to make it crack, because that's what's dropping right into the subconscious mind. So did you hear it crack? So you already know how to make it crack. And you do that 3 times. Now you've created repetition. What happens is you've just changed their timeline from learning a skill to knowledge of the skill. And once you shift them out of the learning into the knowledge, they don't have to worry about learning anymore. And so they go from suddenly, you know, I'm learning how to crack a whip. No, you know how to crack a whip. Don't worry about that. And then the next thing I do is I pull out a target and I hold the target out. Now I know that the next thing that's going to happen to them is they're going to have a fear of hitting me. And before they can even get there, I say, look at me. You already know how to make it crack. I promise you're not going to hurt me. You know, sometimes when you're leading somebody through something stressful, you got to lie to them. I'm kidding. But I have to realize that if I'm a leader in that situation and I'm going to guide them and I want to adjust their brain to do it correctly, I've got to meet them where they are. And where they are is afraid to hit me. And by going in there and directly going at their fear and saying, I promise you're not going to hurt me. It's funny to watch them because they suddenly go, oh, okay. And they just start cracking the whip towards my hand, right? And what happens is, the other thing I don't get them focused on hitting the target. What I actually say is I say, look right here and just cast your fishing rod. And so I'm getting them even out of the idea of the struggle of actually having to hit this thing. I'm just getting them into the space of staying calm and serene and out of their fear and just simply casting their fishing rod at the fish they want to catch. And they hit the target every time. I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, and they always learn it all in under 5 minutes.
Amazing.
And if you watch that video, at the end of that video, you'll see 4 or 5 women taking targets out of my hand with the whip.
That is super cool. On your hypnosis journey, did you go back to people like Milton Erickson, that type of? Yeah, did you get involved in the self-development side of it?
I did. I studied it. I didn't really go to a lot of the. I went to one of the big conferences out in California, but I didn't. I didn't continue with that because I was working. I was getting so much work. Once you put a whip and a motivational speaker together, you get work, you know. And so I continued my studies, but I didn't continue with the big hypnosis thing, and the organizations. But yeah, I spoke at one of the conferences out on the West Coast, one of the NLP conferences and the hypnosis conference, and now it's like I've been out of it for so long because I just use it to do my job, to do what I do, and I don't actually study it any longer, really.
Okay. Any thoughts on Bandler at all?
Bandler. Any thoughts on Bandler? It's been so long. You know, Erickson, of course, but not. Yeah, I couldn't give you a real good answer on that right now.
Well, I just thought because he's like quite influential in that space that maybe that was an inspiration there. But
well, you know, what was really inspiring to me was that I'd go to those, I'd study those things, but I was more influenced by the fact that I had 2 friends who were professional hypnotists now, and actually now 3 friends were professional hypnotists. So I was with them all the time. So my influences came more from them than really from the studies that I was doing, because they were showing me, you know, in time on stage with people. And so to me, that was probably more influential to me than anything else, because I was having real experience, right there in front of my face on a daily basis. So as much as I did study, I actually got more out of the fact that I was watching people practice.
You had a good peer group. Would you say that's true?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My comedy partner, he's a hypnotist. My friend Rick, he's a juggler animal show, but he also does a hypnosis show. And my friend Peter, he's a magician. He went on to do a full hypnosis show. Now he's a hypnotherapist all the time, full time. And really it's just great. Yeah. Having peers that are deep into it was very influential for me.
Cool. You touched on the 5F approach. Would you like to share that?
Sure, absolutely. What the 5F approach is a method of hacking your fight or flight response, breaking through your fear barriers. The first of my 5Fs is fearlessness. And before we can talk about fearlessness, we need to talk about what fear is. Most people, when I ask my audiences all over the world, what is fear? The room goes silent. Nobody says a word. They have no good answer for that until somebody in the back of the room will pull out the old trope, false evidence appearing real. Right? I hear that all the time. And I don't buy that answer because I don't believe it fits scientifically with what fear actually is. Fear, when you look at it scientifically, is simply an emotional reaction to some future event that may or may not happen with you focused on a negative outcome. So it literally is just negatively focused uncertainty. Now, if that's the case, that means fear is not rooted in your present moment. Fear is just an experience of negative focus. And so I've got to break that fear out of the body, because the body has a natural primal response to fear. And the simplest way to address that fear is to do the exact same things the actors on Broadway do. When they're on stage and they see 1,000 people in their audience and they forget their lines, the next thing that they're trained to do is exhale, relax all their muscles, and it shuts off the fear response and turns their cognitive thinking brain back on, and all their lines rush back into their head. And the reason this works is a very simple one. Have you ever watched those National Geographic shows on TV, those safari shows?
Can't say I have, sorry.
Okay. So if for those of you who have, you'll know that almost every episode has a doomed gazelle. Hey, there's always these gazelles that are always getting attacked by something bigger and more fierce. And the gazelle's out there eating grass in the field, just crunching away, and suddenly the lion hits the field. The first thing the gazelle does is go and gasp for air. And it's the same thing with anybody who's in a fear response. They feel like they can't breathe. But it's not that they can't breathe, it's that their body is storing air in their lungs so they can run further and faster. The reason the actors' lines come rushing back into their head is because they exhale. They get the air out of their lungs and they tell their body they don't need the air for survival. And so by shutting off that response that way, they're able to move on. I was very fortunate. I had a chance to go to the front lines of both Iraq and Afghanistan. And I got to talk to soldiers who go in the field. And I said, how could you go into a firefight or a situation where you might get shot at or bombs blown up around you? How can you do it? He said, the first thing to do is they all get together and they go, okay, we're going to do this. And they exhale. That's the first thing they do. But the second thing they do is they get focused on the positive outcome of their objective. They get very seriously focused. So the first of my 5Fs is fearlessness. The second one is focus. So now when you look at focus is an interesting thing. You can focus positively or you can focus negatively. And the interesting thing is there's only one moment in your life you can focus, and that's your present moment. And it's also the only moment that you can create anything to experience, because it's the only moment you have all three creative elements: thoughts, words, and deeds. And your present moment is the place where all those things happen. But your past is a place where they store present moment memories, creating a subconscious belief, subconscious mind from your experiences. But your past has a second job. Number one, it stores those subconscious beliefs, that subconscious memories and those beliefs, those present moment memories. But also, whatever you focus on, your subconscious mind will show you. To give you an example, I love Jeeps. I've had 6 of them in my life. I have one in my garage right now, right? When I drive down the road, I see every Jeep on the road because my conscious mind sees Jeeps because I'm focused on Jeeps because I love Jeeps so much. So I see them everywhere. If you're someone who wants to buy a new car and you decide what kind of car you want to buy, before you go to the store to buy it, you're going to start seeing that car everywhere because that's what you consciously focused on. So your subconscious mind collects and stores these memories for subconscious belief, but it also shows you what you're focused on. So if you've ever noticed a negative person, you know they always have something to be negative about. And that's because they're focused on negative. And so their subconscious mind is showing them negativity, which is giving them a negative moment, which is stacking another negative moment in their subconscious mind, which is creating a treadmill of negativity. That's why they're staying in the treadmill of negativity. The interesting thing is the future is you'll never get there. Your future is just a place where you set goals for future present moments because everything you experience happens in your present moment. And you're never going to get to that. So if you're sitting here creating negatively, no matter what goal you set, you're not going to get there because you're staying in this negative space. But if you can stay in this present moment and start stacking small present moment successes that are in alignment with the goal, that thing comes in and surrounds your experience. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
Yeah. So when you experience that goal, it's not going to be in the future. I mean, you can't go to the store next Thursday right now. You know, you can only do it right here, right now. So it's going to come to you and surround your experience. So fearlessly focus. The next one is faith, belief, confidence. Now, I don't care whether you get your faith in your religion or your spirituality. I am literally talking about confidence, belief that it's going to happen, belief that it's coming. And you can believe that, whatever part of your spirituality, as long as you have the belief that it's going to happen, that confidence, that belief. Buddha says, what you think you become, you create your world. And Gandhi said, you must be the change you want to see in the world. And Krishna said, you are the culmination of your thought. And Jesus says, as a man thinketh, so is he. All of those thoughts are tell you that your mind is creative, and it's all creative by your belief, what you believe in, what you focus on. And so if you believe you're going to get there, you're going to get there. And that's really one of the most important things, because if you look at 5, the middle one is faith. It's the one that holds up the 2 on either side. The next one we've kind of touched on already. It's follow through. Follow through. When you're building towards something, as I said, you've got to create those small, successful present moments. But sometimes when you're coming up, and it's hard to have that faith, and sometimes faith is only developed by results over time, because faith is basically trust, and trust is developed by results over time. So you've got to start stacking your present moment successes. First thing you have to do is you have to set down your past, those beliefs. In Christianity, they would call that being born again, basically starting over and changing your subconscious belief. The cool thing is that once you start creating a subconscious moment that's positive and successful, you've now stacked that into your past belief. And the more of those you stack, the further you push the things that limit you further back, and your subconscious mind starts creating positively. So we got fearlessly, focus with faith, follow through. The last one is the tough one, and it's flexibility. Something is always going to come up that's going to seem contrary to what you're trying to achieve. And when it comes up, your job is to not choose to have it stop you, not to lose faith, to instead say, I have chosen a goal and I'm going for the goal. And this thing has come up, and that came up because my subconscious mind is showing it to me so that I can address it to get to my goal, not to have it stop me. Because, Bruce Lee said, be like water. As you're going down the river, you're going to come to a rock. You can flow over, around, and over time through, but it doesn't stop you. You keep moving. And if you're not continually moving, if you're not continually in motion, then you're going to become stagnant. And stagnancy is poisonous. If you take water in nature that's flowing downhill, when it's moving and bouncing around, it's got oxygen in it, it's got life in it. Take that same water and put it in a puddle, and it will become poisonous and stagnant, and bugs will lay their eggs in it, and it'll become this nasty mire of a place. That's what happens with us. Our life has got to be in constant motion, or because it is in constant motion. It's either going up or down, and if you stop, you're going down. Right? So you have to keep this. Now, when I first learned this skill, um, these 5 Fs. I first developed it because I read a book by Bruce Lee called the Tao Jeet Kune Do, and it was his philosophy of martial arts. And in there, he talked a lot about staying very present, as I've already talked about, and he talked a lot about flexibility, mental flexibility specifically. And that, to be totally honest with you, that book literally got me out of bed after a traumatic back injury.
Well, that is an amazing, should we say, summary of your 5F approach. I think there's an awful lot in there. I feel like I would need to watch that 10, 11 times over to get the full kind of impact of it. Obviously, I do want to talk about your story. I do also want to mention that I'd never heard that about fear before, the exhale, and the reason why that works and why it's beneficial. So thanks for sharing that. Before, I don't know whether it's links to your story, but I did want to touch on, you said that you went to the front lines of Afghanistan and Iraq. What was that? How did that happen, essentially?
Well, I was a stuntman and a fight director, and I had a comedy sword fighting show called Hack and Slash that went all over the world. And very interesting. September 8th, 2001. Get that now, September 8th, 2001. I was walking off stage at Annapolis, Maryland, and 2 gentlemen walked up to me. They said, "Hey, we've been fans of yours for years. Would you be interested in doing USO shows?" And we're like, "Sure, we'd love to do USO shows." So September 10th, 2001, we dropped our packet off at the Pentagon to get ready to do USO. September 11th was Tuesday. The Pentagon and the towers in New York were hit, and everything shut down. They contacted us 3 weeks later, said, "Can you go immediately?" And we said yes. And we left that year in November, and we went November to February all through Europe as they were building up to go into Afghanistan. We were on bases and soldiers were sleeping in hallways because they didn't have enough beds on the bases. And we were entertaining soldiers as they're building up. And then the second tour, they sent us back. We did Europe again, but all the soldiers were already in the theater, in where they're going to be. So Europe was kind of ridiculous to send us back to Europe because, when American soldiers go overseas to Europe, they don't stay on the base for entertainment because they're in Europe. Right? They don't want to hang out on the base, right? So we were having really, really bad shows the second tour. And I kept telling our host, I said, "You need to send us where they need us, not here. You need to send us where soldiers need us. We'll go anywhere you want to send us." Well, the third tour, I found myself standing on the flight line in Fallujah, Iraq. And I was talking to a colonel. And I said, "Colonel," I kept telling them to send us further down range. And I finished the word range, and a quarter mile off to my left, a bomb blew up. And the colonel, without flinching, looked over there, looked back at me, says, "Son, you can't get further down range." And we ended up doing a total of 6 tours, and we had some amazing times and harrowing experiences. And it was one of the greatest privileges of my life and one of the greatest experiences of my life to go over there and find people who are in huge moments of stress and anxiety in their lives, and to be able to be the pressure release valve. We would show up and we'd get them to laugh for 2 hours. That's such an amazing gift to be able to give to somebody who is in that kind of situation. And I had a soldier come up to me in Ramadi, Iraq, after a show. He says, "Mr. Davies," he says, "this morning I was in a firefight. This afternoon for 2 hours, I was able to forget all about that. Thank you so much for coming." So I would go right now anywhere in the world if they asked me to, but I'm not sure they want to see me back in those tights I used to wear.
That is amazing. There's a sort of like a deeper meaning behind that as well, because if you can make people laugh, generally speaking, that can be quite rewarding anyway, can't it? I was going to ask, any point were you regretful about going to like a high, dangerous place like that? But
I do not regret it at all. In fact, I'll tell you the most harrowing thing that happened. I don't know if you remember this. During the war, there was a moment where I think it was the Shia attacked the Sunnis mosque, or vice versa. I'm not sure which one attacked which, in a town called Samara. And we have a base right there in Samara. And that attack happened, and a week later we landed in Samara in 2 helicopters. It was our equipment in the front helicopter, and I had a total of 4 of us came. And so we were in the back helicopter, and our equipment was in the front helicopter. Helicopters come in, they land, they unload our stuff, we get off. First thing they say is, we're going to get some lunch first, but we don't have a dining facility on this base because it's a place where people would congregate, and that would be a target. So go over to that trailer, get your food, and scatter. Basically, don't sit in large groups. So the 4 of us went and got our food. We're looking around. We found this Humvee, and we climbed up in a Humvee, and we ate our lunch. 4 of us. Finished that. Went over and did our 2-hour show, and when we did the show, we had, whips, sword fights, beds of nails, ladder walking, fire eating. We had like a whole 2-hour comedy circus kind of show. It was really kind of crazy. And we finished our show. We got all packed down and took all our stuff out. Helicopters came flying back in. Helicopters don't stay there because they're a target as well. Helicopters come in, they land, they throw all our stuff in the front chopper. We hop in the back chopper. As the toppers take off, a rocket-propelled grenade went underneath the helicopter I was sitting in and blew up the Humvee I had lunch in.
Killed.
And then we were the only helicopters in the air, so we actually went hunting for them, but we never actually found them. But that was a scary moment. Do I regret it? Not at all. I had one instance of that experience. Those guys were having it every day. There's a movie called Groundhog's Day where Bill Murray repeats the day over and over and over and over. And the soldiers were equating their day to Groundhog Day with one difference. It was Groundhog Day, but everybody wanted to kill them.
Mm.
And so they were having that massive stress. So I had I had a couple other experiences, but nothing as grand as that or as scary as that. But I couldn't regret any of it because of the fact that those guys were doing it every day, and it was almost my duty. I also look at the thing as the U.S. has an all volunteer army, and which means every person who was there volunteered to go anywhere in the world to defend my freedoms and the things that I believe in. Now, I don't care if you believe in the wars, Iraq, Afghanistan. I don't care what your political beliefs are. That is the most courageous thing someone can do, is to volunteer their own life to go defend. And it was the least I could do to go there and make them smile for a brief time. Also, I truly believe that by going there and giving them their pressure release valve and giving them a moment of laughter and joy, I might have had them not have a mental breakdown. I might have had them not treat somebody poorly in the local town. I might have done some change in that way too. So I think it was the most important thing I ever did in my life.
Amazing. Did you have any self-reflection or new lease of life as a result of what is essentially a near-death experience?
You know what? I had such a weird experience with that, because when it happened in the moment, I was like, "What's that? Let's go get him!" I was like, I didn't have a fear in the moment. I was like, "All right, let's do it!" Right? And after the fact, I sat back. I was like, that was really close. It went right underneath me and hit where I was just sitting. The question I kept asking myself was, and this is something I asked myself a lot, was, were they considering shooting when I was eating lunch in it? Were they already looking at me as a target early on? I kind of doubt it, because I think the helicopter was the target, because it's a much better target to hit than, for funny guys sitting in a truck, but I've often thought, they hit the Humvee by accident because they were shooting at the helicopter, but were they watching for that moment? Who knows?
Exactly.
But yeah, reflective wise, I still think of it as the greatest thing I've ever done, and would do it again right now.
Did you ever see the Robin Williams performance when he performed to the military at all?
It's so crazy. I followed him, and I say followed, I mean, he would do a show and leave, and we would come in right behind him. And we did that. In fact, right now, if you go on YouTube, you'll find a video of Robin Williams at a base in Kuwait just before he goes into Iraq. I think it was Camp Arif John, I think. But Robin Williams walks on stage and he's starting his bit, and suddenly reveille happens, and the whole audience stands up and turns around, and he's like, "What's going on?" Right? Because the flag was in the opposite direction. You couldn't see it from where it was, but every soldier knew when the reveille hit, the flag was going down, and they had to turn and salute the flag. And so he's like, I came out, I started my bit, and the entire audience turned their back on me, right? Which was really funny. What was amazing to me when I watched that video was I had the exact same experience the year before on that exact stage. I was like, oh my God, I remember that. It was like so strange. I would have loved to have been there when Robin Williams was around, because I think that man was brilliant. I'm really sad that he had the mental disorders he had at the end that caused him to take his life. But I loved a lot about Robin Williams was the fact that his concept that he put in every one of his films, somewhere in his films, he either said carpe diem or seize the day. And to me, it's all about that present moment, that seizing the day. Take this day and make the best of it. And so I love that he had that as a through line of his life. And then, of course, at the end, it was kind of sad the way he seized that last day. So,
great message, though. So coming back to your story, so I'd love to hear about your various professions and how you actually ended up in them, or how began them even.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be Errol Flynn. I wanted to be Robin Hood. And I used to have a stick in my hand pretending it was a sword. And eventually what happened was I went to a Renaissance festival and I met two of the top fight directors in the country, a gentleman named Payson Burt and Brad Waller. And they saw talent in me and they gave me such positive reinforcement at a time when I desperately needed the positive reinforcement. I had an alcoholic, mentally abusive father, and I was the one he didn't like. So I desperately needed good role models and positive reinforcement. And those guys were giving me such great feedback. I decided I wanted to become a stuntman, a fight director. I wanted to do fight choreography and sword fighting for a living. And so I started working that way, and I started going from my black belt in Taekwondo, and I started, becoming strong and buff. And back in those days, I had long Fabio hair instead of this Telly Savalas hair I have now. And and then one day a buddy of mine said, "Hey, why don't you come on out to my house and help me unload my van?" And I said, "Sure." So I went out to his house and I climbed up in his van. Now, he was a professional potter, and his van was filled with 80-pound boxes of clay. And I climbed up in the van. I picked up the very first box. And when I turned to set it outside of the van, my spine broke in two. And I'm going to say that very clearly. My spine broke in two. They hauled me to the hospital paralyzed. Doctor told me I had a condition in a spina bifida occulta, to which I promptly said Gesundheit, because I had no idea what he was talking about. Which basically what that means is that 3 of my vertebrae never formed properly at birth. And with the extra 80 pounds in the twisting action, I literally broke the top half of my spine off the bottom half of my spine and pinched off my spinal cord. And doctor told me that they wasn't sure I was going to walk again. They definitely told me that I would never have a physical career, that I was done. And at 22 years old, with that goal already set in my mind, it was devastating. I went to some very deep and dark places. And then, as I said earlier, a friend gave me a book by Bruce Lee. Well, come to find out, that book was written by Bruce when he was lying on a hospital bed in traction after a doctor had just told him he'd never do martial arts again. And he went on to do every movie that we know him for. So I started just taking those philosophies and started formulating my 5 F's at that moment. First thing I had to do was I had to not take the doctor's belief. I had to take my own belief and not let him dictate what my life was going to be. And so what I did was I started leveraging my present moment. I started with my neck, and I just started flexing my neck muscles. And I slowly worked the muscles down my back until I got to my injury, and I was working the muscles around my injury. And then suddenly one day, I flexed my hip muscles. And the doctors were like, "Oh my God," they couldn't believe it. We were blown away. By day 30, I was sitting up on the edge of the bed. At 6 months, I was walking around. At a year, I was back to a normal physicality, but I was not back to my buff masculine self. But at a year and 6 months, I was. I was all physically back to where I was before. And I climbed up on top of a 3-story tower and I jumped off into a fall pad as a celebration. And went on to do over 4,000 live comedy sword fighting stunt shows all over the world, including the front lines of Iraq and Afghanistan. I've climbed Mount Sinai and Machu Picchu. I've swam in the Blue Lagoons of Iceland. I've been to 30 countries total. I've done everything I've ever wanted. I've worked with movie stars in Hollywood. I've anything I've ever wanted to do, I've now done, because I'm unlimited in my belief of what can be achieved. I decided I moved to Ohio to be near my son. I decided I wanted to become a college professor. I started teaching at Oberlin College, started teaching stage combat to actors. I was an artistic director of theme parks because I wanted to do my theater work as well. I ended up also becoming known as a Shakespeare director here in town. And so I started directing plays just because I enjoyed that. Now I'm a professional keynote speaker full time and bringing all that 5 Fs into the workplace, as I said.
That is definitely an applause moment. If there were a crowd here, they would all be clapping. Congratulations and all of that.
Oh, thank you. It was the hardest, most terrible thing, but the best thing that ever happened to me. And I look at it as the greatest gift because I have 6 brothers and sisters, and they're all very accomplished in their lives. But when it comes down to sitting down and just talking about life experiences, I have done so much more than any of them because of the fact that accident happened and it opened my mind to possibility. And now that I have that mindset, I do anything I want whenever I want. It's really interesting.
Mm. Learn it early. I have noticed a couple of things, which is if you do get some adversity early and you learn how to overcome it, that can really help you in the rest of your life. I'm thinking how bad must your friend have felt when you tried to help him move his stuff and you ended up in hospital for a year or whatever it was.
He felt bad. It wasn't his fault, and I kept telling him, this was a thing that I had since birth. It had nothing to do with what you were doing. I was doing much harder things than moving clay already. I was already doing backflips and landing on hard ground and fighting guys, and I was already doing much harder stunts than lifting a box. So literally, he felt bad, but I think I broke him out of that. I hope so anyway.
You hypnotized him out of that belief system.
Well, at that point, I wasn't really into hypnosis, but it was. I said, I didn't even know I had the back injury. I didn't know I had spina bifida until that moment. I had no clue that I had that condition.
Your inner action hero, is that based on the 5F approach?
Yes, yeah, and the interaction hero is all about that empowerment that I was just talking about that I found because of my accident. But the 5 Fs are basically how to leverage that power and start creating those successful moments that builds your confidence in self and limit your self-defeating talk as well.
So if someone is, let's say, not happy with their current situation, what sort of advice would you give them in terms of the first few things that they can implement?
First thing I'd say is don't focus on not being happy. You only have one moment, and it's what I call the I am moment, right? Not the I will be or I was. And if you want to change anything, you've got to get seriously focused on a positive outcome. And if you're focusing on the negative, you're actually focusing on past experience. You've got to get focused on the future goal, and then just literally right here in this moment, start stacking successful, positive moments. Because if you're in a bad space, it literally is because of some fear that it's going to continue, maybe, or because of those experiences are telling you life is just terrible, right? And so you have to change your moment because it's the only moment you can. And so the first thing I would say is breathe, exhale, give yourself a break. Life. Perfection is subjective, and things always happen. When I'm going through life and something comes up that seems so negative or nasty, or I do something it seems like it's against what I'm trying to create, I no longer beat myself up, because most of us will beat ourselves up worse than we'll let anybody talk about anybody else. And for me, when I mess something up or I don't feel like things are going well, I'll go, I'm so, I'm so dumb. This is what I used to do. I don't do this anymore. That's because I lost my hair when I used to do this. That's why I went bald. But instead of doing this, I'm now going, well, that's just silly, because that's not towards my goal. And the more I started saying things were silly, I started stacking positive. Even my negatives became positive, because silly makes you smile, right? So I just started stacking present moments. So if you're in a situation where you don't like where you are, first thing you have to say is, what are you saying after the words "I am"? Now here's a little spirituality in this. Jesus said, "Whatever you ask in God's name is granted." And Moses said God's name was "I am" after he talked to the burning bush. So whatever you're saying after "I am" is being created into your experience. And I had to take certain words out of my vocabulary. "I am having a horrible time" is a terrible thing to be creating into your life. But the words I took out were wanting, needing, hoping, and trying, because they were inactive present moment words. And by taking moments and putting moments like creating, enjoying, I am enjoying my life. I am eating healthy. I am walking further. I am feeling strong, is very much different than I am wanting, I am needing, I am hoping, I am trying, I am hating this life, I am hating this experience, I'm in a bad space. I know that's just focusing on negativity. And if you want to change your life and you want your life to be positive, you have to realize this is the only moment that you can be positive. You've got to make this moment positive so that your future will be positive.
Great answer.
Oh, thanks. I practiced.
Well, I told you before we were recording that I always ask about what your goals are. In this particular instance, I've had to try and hold myself back until, near the end of the episode, just simply because you've been able to achieve everything that you have set your mind to. And therefore, I'm fascinated about what that's going to be, what's next on the horizon for you.
Well, as I said, life is about motion. And when I find a goal, I always set a new one. And my goal right now is to get very focused on affecting as many lives as possible. I'm currently writing a book called "Be an Action Hero, Not a Reaction Zero," and I'm working on a lot of new ways of reaching more people, because I think that the more I can get this information out to people, then I can affect more lives. And that said, I want to make sure that I'm going to give your audience a gift. And when I say a gift, I mean a gift. I mean, it's a link to go get my 5F workbook, and it doesn't sell anything on that page, and it doesn't even take an email address. It is literally just a link to download it, because today's about bringing value, not taking value. I think the more people who can understand these principles, the more we can change our world for the better, because it limits that fear response. So that's number one. So my other goal right now is to buy a big beach house and go paint pictures on the beach.
A worthwhile goal. And how long do you think that will take, the second goal?
The house?
Yeah.
I think I'll have it within 5 years. Within
Very
5
cool.
years. That's my goal. Is I'm originally from a beach resort. And I grew up in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, which is a beautiful, dolphins jumping in the waves, lighthouses, beautiful sort of East Coast place. And so all my friends are there, my family's there. So going back there will be wonderful. And the real estate market is very expensive there. But I'm like, I don't care. Money's just a number. I'll get the number and I'll have the house. So I have complete faith.
Are you painting at the moment, or does that start when you get the house?
No, I paint all the time. And if you give me a second, I'll grab a painting real quick.
Yeah, go for it. Nice.
Well, thank you. I'm very proud of it.
Is that somewhere local?
Actually, I was on a trip to Branson, Missouri, and I was driving down a country road out in the middle of nowhere, and I snapped that picture, and the sun was just shining, and the haze in the trees, and I was just like, oh, what a beautiful image. I came home and I just kept thinking about that picture. So I pulled that picture out and I just went to town on the canvas, and I just loved it.
Nice. Well, I think a great example of wanting. Let's say you want to achieve something. I mean, there's no not that there's no, but you don't let the little voice get in the way of someone telling you can't do anything, right?
Well, you change the little voice, and the voices change when you start stacking those present moments, and because the little voice is your subconscious mind, and that little voice is easily changed just by, as Jesus would say, being born again, setting that past down and starting something new. To start stacking present moments, and then those present moments get stacked, and that subconscious belief and that subconscious mind and that inner voice starts saying much different things.
Very cool. John, where's the best place for people to find you?
I am easily found, corporateactionhero.com. And you can also find Corporate Action Hero on YouTube and Facebook, and on Twitter, I'm JD Action Hero. But if you go to corporateactionhero.com, you will find all of those links. And that link for that free gift is corporateactionhero.com/gift. And you have to use the link to get there because you won't find it on the page. That's strictly for podcast audiences.
I'll have a look after this episode. But yeah, thank you for all the value. It's been great. I loved it.
Thank you. I did too. This was wonderful. Thank you for having me.